There's been a lot of hot takes flying around since the election actually happened. We have a limited amount of data, but we have some county-by-county analysis that we can look at. And something I think Crystal and I have talked a lot about here is really just the way that the realignment is shifting towards how the parties are polarizing, largely along urbanization and rural communities. Let's throw this up there on the screen. It was noticed that you can actually see there the presidential vote in the 100 counties with the largest share of college degrees. You can see the Democrats actually won 84% of those, or 84 of those counties, with 16 going to the Republicans. Back in 1980, that was 24 for the Democrats and 74. You can see that the Democrats won 9 out of 100 of the highest income counties, and in 2020, Biden won over 50% of the highest income as well. So largely, there's obviously a realignment that is happening here. Derek Thompson over at The Atlantic, somebody I respect very much, he wrote this piece about how why Democrats in the big city dominance may be a problem. Of course, not just for the Electoral College, but because of the political and cultural drawbacks. Ryan, I'm curious for your view. I think you've always been a little bit more in favor of the realignment than some other people on the progressive left, notably Crystal, because you've talked about how you can have, upper middle class wine moms, culturally at least aligned with some people on the more Bernie left. How do you see this whole phenomenon with the Biden results, and what do you make of it?
Well, let me add a friendly amendment to that. I wouldn't say that I'm in favor of the alignment. I think I've been more resigned to the reality of the alignment and looking for ways to make the best of it, so to speak. I think that Democrats made a huge mistake by not making stronger inroads with the rural vote, with the working class vote broadly, and they paid for it, not just by losing working class whites in this most recent election, but by losing working class black and brown voters at a higher rate than they lost. They still won overall, but margins absolutely matter. That's not the direction that this Democratic Party went, and it's not the direction really that any center-left party has gone around the world. And so, and by watching the different phenomena around the world, that's one reason that I was kind of resigned to this trend continuing to unfold. Thomas Piketty, forecast this several years ago in his most recent book, saying that the strength of and this is kind of my own gloss on it, but this is sort of his take. The strength of capital is so ferocious at this point, given the inequality that we've seen growing since the 1980s, that there isn't really a strong enough force to push back against it from the bottom, and so you wind up having both parties being kind of parties of capital. In our country, yes. The Republican Party is the party of kind of the super rich, whereas the Democrats have become the party of the super well educated and increasingly the kind of upper middle class, these suburban voters that you're talking about, and that leaves no party left for working people. Mm-hmm. And if the parties aren't competing for working people, they have to find something else to compete about. And so they fight about the definition of citizenship. They fight about immigration. They fight along cultural lines. And the more that those lines get drawn, the more solidified this gap becomes.
That's right. And this is over at the Dispatch, which is never Trump publication. All of that. They wrote this piece. Trumpism is more about culture than economics. Now, before the election, I probably would have argued that it was more 50-50. I still don't believe that there was Trumpism without economics. I don't think Trump could have gotten elected if he'd, say, run on a Mitt Romney-style position on health care or on Social Security during the 2016 presidential election. But let's be honest, not a lot of the populist economic stuff was there in 2020, and he still won, actually, a ton more votes. He got like 47% of votes. 74 million people voted for him, and he actually increased margins in many of these areas. One thing I saw, an interesting piece, this is from my friend Aaron Sibarium, he mentioned this, which is that the more that the left is going to move on culture, it actually makes it harder for a realignment on populist economics for the GOP, because it will mean that their main position will kind of just be as a bulwark against cultural liberalism. I kind of see the same phenomenon happening on the left, which is really depressing, as you point on it, because it just means we're going to live in an all-culture war politics all the time. And like I said, let's be honest, it worked well for Trump in 2020. And it probably worked well for Joe Biden, too. I mean, 2/3 of the people who voted for him said that it was because he wasn't Trump that they were voting for him. And I see this playing out much more in the future. How do you see it?
Right, and not coincidentally, that is the outcome that is preferable to capital, because then neither party has the power to push back, and you just continue to have this movement in the middle, back and forth. So you're right. I mean, this is where we're headed, and the more that kind of Democrats dig in on that side, you're right, then Republicans become this party of opposition to Democrats. Democrats become a party of opposition to Republicans. And with Donald Trump threatening to run for re-election in 2024, that's great news for those elements of the Democratic Party that don't want to come up with some form of coherent economic ideology that's going to win a 55 to 60% majority, and instead can motivate people just by saying that, look, Donald Trump is running in 2024, and they'll have a reasonable case. Look, they don't. These Democratic voters don't want to go back to a Trump administration, and then the same is true for on the Republican side. That if they're just getting behind Trump, then that got out 74 million votes last time. Let's see if that's enough. Next time around.
Yeah, I always think about, there's a sign I saw in a very rural part of America, like really out there, hundreds of miles, and there was one at a ranch, and it just said, Trump, F your feelings. And I was like, that's kind of what it really is all about in a lot of ways. Yeah. And same thing, I think, on the Democratic side. Anyway, it's an interesting discussion. I think it's a trend I really want to dive into a lot over the next year or so. And we're going to have more Rising for everybody right after this.